Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Facebook Live with Breast Cancer Now. It's really nice to have you all joining us tonight. I'm really delighted to be joined by our speaker, Char Goodwin, who I will introduce to you shortly. And tonight we're going to be talking about the autistic experiences of breast cancer. It's a fascinating subject, and Char has been researching this, so she's going to talk about her experiences and also about her research itself. So just a couple of housekeeping rules to begin with, just to let you know that this session is recorded. So if you're putting any questions down, feel free to put them in the chat box. And we will get through as many of them as we can, but be aware that this session is recorded, so it can be watched back later. If you want to put anything that's confidential in there, just be aware of that. We will also pop in an evaluation form towards the end of the session. It would be brilliant if you could complete that, because it helps us to decide on future sessions and evaluate what's working well and what we could maybe improve upon. So that would be great if you can complete that. And just to let you know that we've got another Facebook Live tomorrow night as well, same time, 7 o'clock, and that is with Little Lifts, the charity, and they're going to be talking about the support and what they offer people with breast cancer too. So I think that's all to say for the moment. Any questions that we don't get through tonight, I will reply to you tomorrow, but hopefully we'll get through as many of them as we can today. And this, I'm sure, is going to be a really informative and interesting conversation. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to Char. And Char is our clinical, no, she's not, she's a research fellow at Exeter University in the psychology department. She has a lived experience of breast cancer as an autistic person, and that has sort of shaped and sort of informed her research as well. She's got an awful lot of knowledge, an awful lot of experience, and if you'd like to just introduce yourself briefly, first of all, Char, and explain your background and what's led you into doing this research in the first place, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks, Katy, and thank you for inviting me to come and talk today. My experience started all the way back in October 2019 when I found a lump. Just one Saturday evening whilst watching the telly, and from there, obviously knew I had to go and see the GP. My husband told me I had to go, although I didn't really particularly want to. Felt a bit reluctant to do so, but I went to see a GP, and from there was to have the 2-week wait, as in to have an appointment at the hospital where I had the mammogram, ultrasound, and biopsy. I was diagnosed in November 2019 with invasive ductal carcinoma and DCIS in my left breast. And that kind of started my whole cancer experience. And I went on to have a therapeutic mammoplasty in my left breast, a reduction in my right, and the sentinel node biopsy. And this was all just done pre-COVID. So I was lucky to be able to get both of those done, if you can say lucky, before COVID. And then I had radiotherapy during the first COVID lockdown. And halfway through that, the rules had just changed, and my daughter came home from school with a cough, and so I had to isolate for 14 days, right smack bang in the middle of my radiotherapy. And then I've also been on endocrine therapy, so tamoxifen, and also then Zoladex. And I'm just coming up to my 5 years, so I'll be stopping all treatment next month. But when I was going through my breast cancer experience, I realised that I was struggling with things that other people with breast cancer didn't seem to be struggling with. There was a lot of self-blame that I had for that. I figured I just wasn't coping very well, and I couldn't understand why that was. Things related to, like, I couldn't touch my scars, for example. I just physically could not touch my scars for many, many weeks. And I couldn't work out why. I felt like something was physically stopping me, and I was just like, I don't understand what's going on. But it wasn't until about 18 months after I finished active treatment that I started to realise that I'm autistic. And then I did the deep dive into all things autism and started learning about barriers to healthcare. And those barriers to healthcare I could totally relate to. And I was like, this is starting to make sense to me. And I thought back to my cancer experience, and then started to think about those barriers to healthcare that can exist at an appointment. What's it like when there are multiple appointments like there is within cancer, when you've got to go and see multiple healthcare professionals for different treatments, tests and procedures? So what is it like for that cumulative effect of those healthcare barriers? And that was a motivation for the project, the Autistic Experiences of Breast Cancer Research Project.
So yeah, and so because you've got that lived experience as well, I'm sure that you can relate to a lot of what you're finding in your research as well. I know it's not quite been published yet, so we can't go into that in too much detail. But the research itself, I think if you want to just explain, I think there are four main components to the research itself, and then we can explore a little bit about that.
That's right. So I'm the lead researcher, but have a fantastic team with me. Who and the basic aim for the project is that we're wanting to explore the autistic adults' experiences of breast cancer, a diagnosis, and also to determine those autism-specific challenges and barriers to accessing breast cancer treatment. And that can also is including exploring what could have made things a bit easier. And so we are doing this in 4 different parts. So the first part was exploring my experience of breast cancer, because I didn't know I was autistic when I went through my treatment. And so this first part was looking back on that, now that I do know that I'm autistic and have this kind of more of an understanding on the language and terminology that I now have, and looking back over my experience to try and make sense of it. And then the second part of the project is recognising that my experience is just one experience, and we need to hear about more experiences. So we are currently going through these interviews to hear about other autistic people's experiences of breast cancer. We will then be having a survey, which is the third part, which will be later on this year, where we will ask autistic and non-autistic people and compare their responses. Again, those people who've had breast cancer, and then each of the different parts informs the next part. And so the final part is a set of guidelines for healthcare professionals, based on the findings from the previous parts, to help them support their autistic patients, as well as provide recommendations for autistic people currently going through breast cancer. And we do all this with our lived experience advisory group. So we have a group of autistic people who've had a breast cancer diagnosis, and they have co-designed the interview questions, and they will co-design the survey questions, and we'll also co-design the guidelines, because we want to make sure that what we produce is useful for the autistic community.
Fantastic. So it's a massive piece of work,
Yes.
and the aim is to improve care for autistic people with breast cancer ultimately at the end, so that we can have guidelines and that healthcare professionals will understand better the support needs of the autistic community.
And I should say it is obviously funded by Breast Cancer Now as well. I always like to put make sure I put that in, tick the box for saying that.
And it's as far as the eligibility for the study, you're looking at both primary and secondary breast cancer patients, aren't you? Is that right?
Yeah, we welcome primary and people who've had recurrences, as well as secondary breast cancer, to be eligible within the study. Yeah.
Brilliant.
We want to hear about the different experiences and understand that those different experiences and different treatments and that kind of the longevity, obviously, nature of it and how that is. So being able to, throughout the whole of the project, it is what we welcome participants from primary, secondary and recurrence as well.
And everybody's needs are going to be different. I think that's something that you've got to always acknowledge. I mean, and same with anybody with a breast cancer diagnosis, and people who are autistic, their needs will differ as well. It's not that it is a blanket.
No, there's a huge amount of heterogeneity within autism, and I think that's one of the big things that can sometimes make it more difficult, or has been the experiences of autistic people when they've tried to access healthcare, is that there can be a lot of outdated information out there. A lot of the autistic criteria is still based on young white boys. So if you don't belong in that category, then how you experience the world and how the sensations and the information, how you process it, may not be how somebody else might think autism is, if you want to use those terms. So yeah, it's often when you are going to go to what's one of the barriers actually for going to to an appointment is you don't know with the healthcare professional you're going to see what their knowledge of autism is. You don't know if they have any experience, and if that experience is not, is up to date. Is it what we know now about autism from autistic people rather than what other people's perception of autism is?
Yeah. And as it was in your case as well, there'll be a lot of autistic people that don't know they're autistic as well, and particularly I think older generations as well that maybe don't identify as autistic, but their needs are still there.
Yeah, there's
Um,
missed generations. There's a lot of people kind of more in my age group are starting when their kids get diagnosed autistic, that they start thinking, oh, hold on, I'm very similar to them. Maybe I need to start thinking about this myself. And that's, I mean, my son was diagnosed when he was 8. He's 18 now, and it took me a lot longer before I started to realise that I was like, oh. Now, if I look back, I think it was really obvious, but I didn't know at the time. But yeah, I mean, in terms of knowing, but in terms of with autism in general, is that not every autistic person will have a formal diagnosis. There will be plenty of autistic people who won't feel safe to disclose that they're autistic within a healthcare setting or in other settings, or may not wish to disclose they're autistic. And there will be many autistic people who self-identify, and then there will be the autistic people who are unaware that they are autistic, like I was when I went through treatment as well.
and I know we've talked in the past, Char, about how difficult it can be to seek help and support if you do have a symptom and you're autistic, because just the simple process of for some people, the TLC messaging that we have at Breast Cancer Now is touch, look, check. If you notice anything that's different, get it checked out by a GP. That's quite straightforward advice, and I think people would understand that that's what they need to do, but that's not as straightforward for somebody that's autistic necessarily. And
No, I think that's the thing. You see a lot of the adverts, don't you, on the sort of say like, oh, if you notice something that doesn't feel quite right, or you think something could be cancer, just go to your GP. And I think that just is quite a loaded word, because there's so many steps involved in just going to see your GP, and these are a lot of the barriers that the research has shown. And I think it's important to kind of say is that when we talk about autistic experience, we're not talking about just one version of that experience. There's going to be lots I can't speak for all autistic people. We're not all the same. We all have different experiences, but I can share some insight into that. And for healthcare barriers associated with just going to a GP, you're looking at things like trying to make that appointment in the first place. So a lot of GPs you need to ring up and to book an appointment, which using the telephone can be really quite difficult for a lot of autistic people and can be impossible for some. So there's that immediate barrier straight away of having to try and access that appointment in the first place. And then it's like speaking to a receptionist and trying to describe or explain how you're feeling, or if there's pain, and using words like lump, like I had, is a lot easier because lump can be more associated. If you have a breast lump, you'll be like, right, we need to get you in. But what if I didn't have a lump, but might have just said, it just feels odd, it just feels weird, I don't know how else to describe it. So you're going to be able to get an appointment that way, being able to describe and being believed with what you're saying. And then obviously when you get to a GP, you've got like the waiting rooms, they're often noisy places, crowded, lights, and the sort of different smells, and then having to see the doctor or nurse, and again, as I said before, about whether or not they have their understanding of what is their understanding of autism, what do they know about the heterogeneity of autism, do I have to explain, how do I explain what I'm experiencing? And I often think as well, you quite often in doctors get told, oh, doctor's appointment is for one thing, if you need more than one thing, book multiple appointments. And I quite often be like, okay, so it's not just like one thing might connect to another thing that might connect to another. So which of those one things am I talking about, or do I talk about them all, or do I not? So it's sometimes quite difficult to sit there and be like, well, if I stick to what you've said, just one thing, then am I explaining it enough? If I do all the things, then will I get into trouble for saying too much or taking too long? And so it's a real kind of like, oh, this is a quite difficult thing to do in the first place. And things like examinations as well, that means being touched, and
the touch, yeah.
they not want, not like you. It's weird, the amount of times you have to take your top off for breast cancer is just insane. It's hard
Yeah.
to do, that you have to just keep doing, and this is all before you've even got to hospital with being referred. So yeah, it's not
And
a just.
and the anxiety that goes with all of that as well. So not only is the anxiety of I need to make an appointment to go to a GP, is what is that GP going to say? What's the next step going to be? The uncertainty as well, which it's very, very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I found throughout my experience was the not being able to know, like have that all set out. There was no predictability in what I was going to experience. It was all waiting on the next appointment, the next test result, the next sort of bit. You just get through this, then we'll tell you the next bit. It was like, oh, I really could do with having it all planned out, so I can just plan for it, work it all out, and sort it all out. Those types of things is what I found really difficult, because you are waiting to know what, it's like, well, the only thing I think I had for one of mine was when they said to me at the very beginning, you will need surgery regardless of whether this is cancer or not. So the fact they told me that I was going to need surgery made me kind of go, right, I know a next step, I know what I'm doing, which made it a bit easier to deal with. But then that got changed, the appointment was changed to a week later, and then that was very difficult to deal with. But I remember waiting to hear whether I did actually need chemo was quite hard to go, and I appreciate the fact I haven't been through chemo. I haven't had that experience, and I have understood from hearing other people's cancer stories how difficult that experience is, and I don't want to take away from that at all. But not having that uncertainty of not knowing what you're going to have, and are you not, you still end up planning it in your mind of what you might need or might not need, or what your kids might need and what your kids might not need, because it's a possibility. So there's still so many uncertainties going on that I try to plan for everything, because that was more comfortable than just waiting and seeing.
Yeah. And everybody will plan for it differently, but you're right. I think a lot of people want that, almost the planned out, which with a cancer diagnosis and treatment, it is staged, and you don't really, very rare is that you will know at the very beginning exactly what the next step is going to be. So did you have any support in trying to sort of compartmentalize that a little bit, or?
Well, because I wasn't aware that I was autistic as I went through treatment, the healthcare professionals were unaware that I was autistic as well. So I didn't kind of flag any kind of thing in that way. And the way I got through my appointments was just pushing all my emotions to one side and just getting through them. So I was kind of more deemed like the model patient. I was very compliant. I just did as I was told. And then I dealt with the after effects when I got home, because I was just like, just get me through. I kind of called it, it's like putting up defences, like, barriers. So you just sort of go, right, I put these up, put my little guards up, and then I'll go to my appointments, and then I'll get through it, or just get through, and then I'll get home, I'll deal with the consequences there. In terms of the support, obviously I had my family around me, but it was support from the healthcare team. They didn't understand what I needed, because I didn't understand what I needed either.
No. Okay. And you've talked a lot about your family and about your children, and I think that's something else that can be very difficult, is communicating with your family and with your children about your diagnosis, and especially as you mentioned that your son is autistic as well. Was that a challenge for you to talk about that?
It was more of a challenge, trying to work out how best to approach it. When I was diagnosed 5 days before his 13th birthday, and so I was aware that I didn't want to, and I've spoken to my kids and they've told me what I'm allowed to say. So this is all done with their consent. We didn't want him to feel like his birthday was associated with cancer, so I delayed telling them for a while, but it also gave me a bit of time to start trying to gather some information. I like information. Information makes me feel comfortable, and as a researcher, that's what I do. I go and research.
Yeah.
So I started to look and see, right, what is there available? Where's all this research I need that tells me how to support telling autistic kids that their mum's got cancer? How do you do that? And I couldn't find anything. I would contact the autism charities, the big autism charities, and they would say, oh, okay, contact the cancer charities. You contact the cancer charities, and they go, oh, have you tried the autism charities? And you're like, okay, we're getting nowhere here. And so it's just thought, like, how am I going to do this? There isn't anything really that's been done. So I then thought back, going, what does my family need? And so we ended up creating our own resources for my son and my daughter, who's also autistic, but we didn't realise then either. And we had like our own version of a photo book that we created on days that I was going to surgery or radiotherapy, where we had photos of the hospital, we had photos of who would be picking them up. We kept their routines as much as possible the same. There's only certain trusted members of the family that will be able to, that they see as trusted, they're trusted people. So we kept them involved in their life far more. And we explained to them what it will be like, how I might be like, how I might be different to what I'm normally like, to try and prepare them beforehand. But it was hard. They didn't really talk about it. My daughter, bless her, was 10, and when I came out of surgery, when I came home, she was like my shadow. She wouldn't leave my side. She didn't say anything. She wouldn't talk to me about it. Neither of them talked to me much about it at the time. I've since spoken to them because I'm 5 years on now, and they both said the big thing that they were concerned about, my son has said, he was worried that I was I was going to die, essentially. That's what he was worried about, but he didn't know how to talk about it, and he didn't know how to explain it. So he just kept it to himself. And my daughter is also very similar in that she will keep things to herself, but we found a book for her. I've actually got a couple of books to kind of show how we explained. So when I first told them, the kids, I was aware of some books that had been written for kids. There's one called Mummy Has a Lump and things that were based around a story and things like that. And I thought, oh, that's not going to work for my kids. They'll be like, you're just telling me a story. How does this relate to you? And I just needed facts. And so I got a kind of unusually titled one called Cancer Party, that was, whilst it's based for quite young children, it was just quite factual in terms of how it worked, how cancer was and how treatment worked. And so I used that as a basis to tell them, and that actually worked quite well. But then for my daughter, she wanted to read more, and there was this one saying my parent has cancer and it totally sucks, or it really sucks, should I say. And she said that this was really helpful because it was advice from, it contained advice from real life teens also going through it, so they had questions in there that she could
relate to.
Yeah, but also that she didn't want to ask me in case it upset me or upset her dad.
Right.
So she wanted the information for it. But now, 5 years on, they talk more to me about it. But it does take a while for them to process it. And it has taken a while for them to process it. And I think giving them that time and space to have that time to just kind of get their heads around it as well.
And that's, you're talking about processing information. I mean, that's something that we know, that autistic people process information differently, and there can all sometimes be an overwhelm of information when you're diagnosed with breast cancer. And how can that manifest itself sometimes if you're feeling overwhelmed with all the information that that you're having? I know it was really helpful that the healthcare professionals are aware of your situation and what works for you, but was there anything that you would have asked to have been done differently potentially with the information that you were given and when you were given it?
So I think with the information that you get in general through the whole cancer experience, like the leaflets that you get, I mean, I still have all of mine that I was given. They didn't contain the information that I needed. The information that was in them was stuff that I'd already Googled before I went to the appointment because I wanted to know that kind of predictability, what was going to happen. So it was the kind of stuff I was like, oh yeah, I already know this. Where's the answers to the other questions that I have? So like for surgery, for example, it's like being told like some of the main kind of things of what would happen, it was good, but then it was also like, but what's it like to wake up after an anaesthetic? You know, I wear glasses. Well, where will glasses be when I wake up, because I won't be able to see anything? You know, when will I get to see my husband when he's, you know, because he's going to take me down? There's all these other kind of questions that I had that weren't featured within any of these types of information. And I think in general, with a lot of times when you're giving information, that you're sometimes given just as the kind of the bare bones of the information, in thinking like, we'll sugarcoat it, or provide you with like, this is all you need to know. And that can help for a lot of people. That can be like, that's all I need right now. But for me, I needed all the information I could get my hands on. And so I think one of the big things that I talk a lot about when I speak to other healthcare professionals and other people as I talk about my work, is that asking about information preferences is really important, to find out kind of like, do you want that in to be told the information? Is that the way you want to be able to take it in? Would you prefer it was provided in a written form? You know, is there videos or things that might be helpful that you can help explain things? You know, it's like, what way do you prefer your information to be given to you, and how best would you like that to be received? I mean, sometimes, like you say, the amount of information you get given it's like learning a new language. There's so many new words and terminology that you've got to pick up, and if you've just come to an appointment you've just experienced all the barriers of the waiting room and the kind of just getting yourself to that appointment, and then you're suddenly sat and told a ton of information, and you've got to try and take that all in and process what's being said, and then you're off again, and that's it. It might be a bit later that you go, hold on, okay, I've got questions now. I've got questions related to what I've just been told. And so it's like, it's really important to be trying to be able to say, it's like, when can I get those questions answered? Is there an email rather than a phone number I can ring? Is there an email that I can send my questions to, or follow-up ones, or even having like a list of questions you can take in the first place, and even as something as simple
Can
as
you
handing it
record your
over.
consultations as well?
Yeah, and then there's other apps like things like Otter AI and things that are like the text-to-speech apps that you can put on. There's also a thing about if you're taken a trusted person with you who might be able to take notes during appointments, or if they're on speakerphone or something like that. So there's, I think it's really important when you are given all this information that it is provided to you in the way that you need it. And if it's not being provided to you in the way that you need it, to sort of either, and I think what I was saying to this before we came on, I think one of the big things that where we are right now is that healthcare professionals, as a majority, do not know how to best support their autistic patients. And so it ends up being down to the autistic patient to be the one who has to educate and advocate for their needs. But these barriers that they're experiencing are on top of the cancer treatment themselves. So they are already going through this treatment and all these procedures and all these appointments, but they're experienced barriers on top of that. And then they're also then have to educate the healthcare professional about what it's like or what they need. It's a big ask.
Yes.
It's a really big ask. But until we can get into that position where the healthcare professionals will be asking these questions and will be sort of saying, you know, what way would you like to have your information given to you? What are your communication preferences? Unfortunately, there seems to be more of, you know, having to be down to the autistic person or their advocates to
communicate that, and it's their responsibility
to say what their needs. Yeah.
So it's, and this is where your research is so valuable, isn't it? Because there's hopefully it will inform, and it will then be able to, from the research, we'll be able to see the best guidelines and the best sort of practice that we as healthcare professionals can provide to our patients.
Yeah, absolutely. And because the project is informed directly from autistic people, we're not getting other people's perspectives. It's directly from autistic people themselves about their experiences. We hope that the guidelines that we will be producing will be used by healthcare professionals within cancer care for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. And I know just there's one more thing. I think we were talking about stimuli and how hospital. You've mentioned already that like a GP waiting room, it can be noisy, it can be light. There's the touch, there's a sense of smell. Is there anything that would help with that? I mean, is as you said, I know it's putting the onus back on the patient sometimes, but ideally, would we be able to provide a quieter area or a more
Yeah, ideally having low sensory spaces would be great, but
mm,
when there aren't those kind of things in mind, it's worth kind of thinking about what might be helpful for the autistic person to go to their appointment. I mean, I've been sat here the whole time during this with a stimming toy because it helps me to concentrate and focus so I don't go off as I talk about other things. But taking things like stimming toys that can be really, really helpful. Another one is that a lot of autistic people will swear by their noise cancelling headphones. I have mine with me. Obviously, when you go into an appointment, you'd be able to tell the receptionist that you would need somebody to come and tell you when it was your appointment if you've got headphones on. But I've had that so I'm hearing impaired as well. So I've asked before saying, I won't necessarily hear my name being called, so could you get somebody to come and get me? So I don't see why that can't be the same kind of thing if you're needing to have your noise cancelling headphones on. Other kind of comfort things in terms of like textures can be helpful if you like things that are quite soft. People sometimes wear loops and things, but anything that you can take that can make that experience, that waiting time, that bit more bearable, it is worth having with you, because they won't have those types of things in the hospital themselves. So taking the things that you need and telling them that you need these things.
yeah. And if possible, and I know this isn't always possible in a busy hospital environment, but requesting to have your appointments either at the beginning or the end of the clinics so that you're not sat waiting for a very long time and you can be in and out. Or if it is going to be a long clinic, being able to go away and get away from that environment and maybe have a phone call to say when your time is coming up rather than having to sit for long periods of time.
Yeah, I think there's a big thing, like when you sort of getting to a hospital, you have to take into consideration the travelling, the parking, any kind of transport issues, and also if you have caring responsibilities. That if you're autistic, you're likely to have autistic family members, and so they're having to bear those things in mind. That the beginning and the end of the day ones may coincide with school runs, and it's more important to be, I have to keep a routine for my kids for their school runs so that I can't do those in the same time. And that's what happened with me, was like, I need to do the school run, I can't do those times. So I was given a whole load of different times, which then meant I couldn't develop a routine of being like, it's the same time each day, because it was varying different traffic things. So I think there's a lot of things that it's kind of breaking things down into smaller parts and realizing how each part can affect the next one, as opposed to it just sort of being a kind of just turn up, well, you can come at this time, that'd be great, but that might not be okay that time. So it's trying to find what works best for you and your family.
And finally, I just wanted to ask a little bit about the psychological support that is offered or not offered in some cases. Was it something that you found was available to you, or if you don't mind me asking this, you don't feel that you have to explain, but was it something that was offered to you, or was it something that you felt that was lacking, really, I suppose?
My cancer experience was quite a weird time with the beginnings of COVID. So when I was going through radiotherapy, it was at the time before we had the vaccines, before we really knew what was going on. So a lot of things just stopped. So there was no kind of complementary kind of things that you would have alongside. There was all these. I was told about how there was various events or things that would happen that would take place throughout your kind of cancer experience. that just stopped when it came to COVID.
Yeah.
So you were kind of quite isolated in general. Um, how I felt going through my experience was that, I know this is talked about quite a lot within the cancer community, is it feels like a conveyor belt going from appointment to appointment to appointment. And then the end of active treatment, you feel like you fall off that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly the same that happened to me. And then I felt like I broke. That's how I always think. I fell off it and I broke, because it was, at the time, my kids' lives were turned upside down because they weren't in school. So all the routines were out the window. My husband was on furlough. I was trying to recover. And it was like recovering with an audience, which made it very difficult. So I did contact a local cancer charity and was offered counselling, and that was really, really helpful. It was actually because of the counselling, I think, and a lot of the self-reflecting that I have done through counselling was what made me realise that I'm autistic, was being in that right sort of headspace to kind of start looking back at things and then going, oh, hold on a minute. So yeah, but there wasn't a lot of the things I think that possibly could have been or would have been potential offer just stopped because of COVID. So I just didn't have access to any of it.
Really difficult.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that, and that being isolated as well. And I remember you saying before to me about recovering with an audience, which is a really
Yeah.
powerful analogy actually, because most people don't have to do that, do they?
No.
You can be at home and relaxing and trying to sort of process things in your own time, but when you've got a house full around you, that's really, really difficult.
And you couldn't just kind of go in the car and drive somewhere and go and sort of be by yourself, because you weren't allowed to do any of those things either. So it was a tough time, for sure. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and for the research that you're doing, which is so needed. And we were saying this earlier, weren't we? And so valuable. And I'm sure that from this research, there's going to be changes. There has to be changes, and it sounds like we really need to do that. So thank you so much, Char, for giving up your evening this evening to talk us through your experiences, but also the research that you're doing.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.
And thanks to everybody for watching tonight as well. If you do have any questions that you would like to talk to us about, you can always phone our helpline. We are open tomorrow from 9 o'clock, and the number is 0808 800 6000. I just had to think about that for a moment. Or you can email us. So as Char said, sometimes it's better to get information in writing, and we do have our Ask Our Nurse written service as well. So if you find that's a better way of communicating, please do send us an email. And also we have a lot of other support as well that is available. So our Someone Like Me service, if you wanted to talk to somebody else that was in a similar situation, we can match you with volunteers as well. That's just one example. There's lots of other things that we do offer, so do have a look at our website, and do give us a ring if you want any more information, or pop any questions in the chat, and I can reply to them tomorrow. So thank you very much for your time this evening, Char, and thanks everybody. I hope you have a restful rest of the evening. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.